Greetings everybody and welcome to another video. Today we are going to be talking about the 4,000th time at this point that we are talking about the new version of Mont coming out with Ashes of the Apocalypse 3, as well as Spring Doom, who's available on the global version. Now, Mont will be available probably within a month's time on global, but it is relevant that both are out now currently on JP, and we're going to be talking about party organization today. Now, I also want to say that I do think, and I haven't commented too terribly much on this, I do think that the new version of Mont and the new version of Doom are definitely one of those moments where it is very clear that we have entered into a new power level for characters. Very evident by the fact on JP that I've seen not only just a mass number of team compositions with these guys of every element, damage type, and all kinds of nonsense within a week's time, but that every JP player seems to have gotten at least one of these two characters, and it does make sense, as I've said. Much in the same way as when Sephiroth came out for the Final Fantasy VII Intergrade collaboration. It felt like a new power level had been reached with just how capable the character was of handling old things, and just generally how strong he was. And that lasted for about a year. Sephiroth was powerful and meta, just in the meta, the high meta too, for about a year's worth of time on JP. Now, looking at these two new characters, I can see it being a very similar type of situation. But again, today we are here to talk about party organization. And before we get too far into this video, I do want to state that at this point, JP is still pretty unsettled. It is the Wild West, because over the last week, I have seen, again, these two characters appearing in many different parties, with some results looking very strong and some results looking not so strong. So there is just a ton of information out there, and it's still going to take a little bit of time with VCs and raid equipment coming this week to support these characters, which could push them even higher into the stratosphere than they already currently are, which is terrifying, but also a little bit exciting too. So there really isn't a good consensus of watching videos. So what I'm going to take is Game 8's data, and we're going to look at it in terms of what teams they think are the best through multiple tiers. And since they're the only website, as opposed to Ultima or some other ones that seems to have this kind of stuff for JP right now in a very clear, organized fashion, this is what I'm going to use for this video. This is it. So let's take a look at what those look like. First off, here you can see what is considered to be Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Now, it's pretty interesting taking a look at these tiers and what is considered to be best. For the most part, I tend to agree with this. I'm not a super big fan of sites like Ultima or Game 8, as these characters' values can depend on what is in the meta. You can't just look at it in terms of a vacuum and say that these characters are stronger. Maps count, equipment counts, all of that stuff counts. So yes, that I think is quite fair. But the more recent shift in this page has caused me to at least take notice of it, and I'm going to add my own commentary to it, such as it is. So Tier 3, starting a little bit at the bottom. I don't want to spend too long here or on Tier 2. Just really take a brief look. So first off, Evade Fire. Yes, this team definitely does feel at least Tier 3, because by today's standard, it gets pretty hard countered by how good a lot of characters are without accuracy equipment. But it can still catch some teams unaware, so fine. Glassy, the standard win team, plus, well, this very offensive, not much in defensive. I can see why it would lose a bunch of matches. Moving on. Tier 2, Pure Ice. I can say that this is quite strong with the addition of Old Doa. Strike team is particularly good when strike resistance isn't that good. Light is one that I kind of hold in a little bit of contention because I do think it is stronger here, mostly because of Helena, but because of Helena, it is worthy to say that I think this could be a tier 1.5, as sometimes when I see this in different videos, it sometimes surprisingly pulls out a win from some places. So I do want to highlight that. Next up, Pure Thunder. I do think that this is definitely a tier 2, maybe even a tier 2.5, with just how strong Mont is and the fact that he is appearing in multiple parties. There has been actually a case this week where I tried a Thunder party versus a Mont with Ice, and it wasn't an old Doa, but I still figured I would end up winning. I ended up losing, with Mont being one of the standout characters who survived till the very end. Long story short, don't underestimate that guy's power. And last but not least, this weird little axe one. Kind of surprised it's on here, but it is kind of maybe something that people underestimate. Now we go up to tier 1. And I do want to also talk about some notable exceptions that I think aren't here, but that is a little bit later. So the types of teams that we have here that are agreed on by this website as being the generally strongest are Summer Glassy, June, and Ferris being the strongest, one of the strongest elemental parties. Specifically, what we're looking at here is just water as an element is generally quite strong. Next up is Earth with King Bradley, Mont, and Halloween Lucio, which I think is really standing on the strength of Mont currently, and I do expect this party to change very quickly into the future, with quite possibly Earth Veritas being the sub-in for this party of one of the two other DPSs, just because I think Earth Veritas is looking quite strong, and once people have him fully built, I think he will be quite capable of handling stuff along with you. All right, next up, we have a Great Sewer party featuring June, A2, Thunder, Astrius. Next, we have Spears, which includes Fire Spear Boy, Volk of recent late, new version of Old, and Wind Veritas. And last but not least is the strongest Mage-based party, Oldoa, New Helena, and VV, which is quite nice to see VV lasting quite so. There are a few notable exceptions here. Personally, I still think that the Thunder team without Lightning, but with Xmas Wrath, is generally stronger from just anecdotal evidence from people in my own guild who have spoke a little bit about how much stronger this is. Also, while the Axe team, maybe it doesn't feel like it's quite a tier 2 one, but again, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, we're only looking at a couple of teams from each of them, and I'm sure that there is a few other teams in that tier that could probably classify. So, starting our way at the bottom, there isn't too terribly much. I do agree that this is a generally mostly tier 1, probably knocked down a little bit by how strong some anti-magic tanks can be, as well as just an anti-magic team, but possibly with someone like Spring June, Celeste, and whatnot might just completely wipe the floor with this team, but I still think that it is quite good such as it is, and still will be quite good in the future. So for globalers who ended up with Oldoa, this might be the organization setup that you want to go with. Noting also that the VC here, while there are a couple of limited and at least one hollow for now, this is quite an obtainable team that I think is very reasonable for most people to build, providing that you've been around the game, or at least since Final Fantasy IX and probably FF9 stuff such as VV. But for one thing I do want to highlight is VV and the newer version of Helena do still have a place in the current meta and it's strong. Next up, the Spear-based party, probably more notable, just like the Mage-based party, as being in tier 1 for going up against teams without the necessary resistance for this specific damage type. This one does, I think, start to verge on the more difficult to obtain, though. As you look at multiple hollow VCs, and even some more limited ones that will be more difficult. The only reason I say this is because the FF9 card down here with VV, FF9 has a much better chance of coming back than Full Metal Alchemist, I think, at least for the time being, given how slow collaborations are to return. That's kind of just an early prediction, but both FMA and Final Fantasy 13 make this team even more unachievable for most players. But again, what we are essentially looking at here is the best in the damage types. And no, I don't think shooting has a particular place right now, and will require a lot to get back there. Next up, Tier 1 is where we start to see the influence of June, along with Thunder Asterius and A2. Quite a starting to be even just more limited in terms of its build, but very, very powerful. And I think this team is quite interesting because with the right BC support, if you have all of these VCs, it is potentially a really, really, really good slash team that is multi-elemental and therefore can have a few advantages against multiple different teams. I did say that I have tried this team personally over the last week, and I found it to be not quite as good. Maybe I'm not targeting the right team, but it has overall HP strong HP regeneration capabilities, damage reduction, capable of messing with the other team, and just very, very, very powerful. So yeah, I think this team is very, very good, but it's not what I consider to be the strongest. And this, the strongest team in Earth, again, I think this team will shift over the next bit, but I think that you can also note that a little bit of this team seems to be just the evadey luck style bit, which is probably why it's mostly Tier 1. Its damage capability is quite high, and this is a team that I've seen a lot through different matches over the last week. It's one of the most obvious places for Ash King want. But even that being said, King Bradley has shown that his DPS has been falling off more, and he does have some difficulty against other teams. He's kind of just barely hanging on, and without kind of an upgrade, he'll probably pull off. Halloween Lucio does kind of fit that still evadey thing that you kind of want to be doing here. Just not too terribly much, because as it turns out with Ash King Mont, this team is very capable of putting out a lot of DPS. You can break down physical barriers, you can do a bunch of stuff. I think that this is really good. And one other thing that makes this Tier 1 right now, if you look at some of the other high tier teams, specifically with the Mage-based team, Aunt Silence is actually very, very good at happening. And if it does, it kind of just cancels out a Mage team. So it gives this team multiple facets. But out of all the teams, I do think that Water is currently the best, with the only possibility that me as a Water Ice player thinks in general that perhaps a combination of Water and Ice should be higher and should probably take, the top spot, because I think A2 is just insanely powerful. A2 combined with Old Doa or Summer Glassy and new version of June probably feels like the best team right now. With the oppression of an Earth team like this, Thunder doesn't stand too terribly much of a chance. Thunder teams have been riding the coattails of Bridal Elia for just long enough that it's starting to feel like Bridal Elia has run out her goodwill. Alphonse as a tank just can't quite cut the mustard as well as the newer versions of tanks out there, and it kind of puts it into sharp relief that Thunder teams are feeling an incredible amount of pressure. But that essentially opens the door for a very, very strong Water team like this. I have to say, I'm quite surprised to see on this that June, as well as Ferris, or sorry, not June, but Summer Glassy as well as Ferris, have taken the top spots over ice elements, since so many VCs here kind of have a cross between water and ice. The water does have this giant benefit of so many 90 cost VCs that are heads and tails still above a good number of even newer vision cards, leaving water to just have this access to terribly powerful amounts of great weapons, equipment, and VC, leading to an absolute insane combination. But there's just a bunch here of stuff that's quite interesting. I think the range buff working together with the foundation of powering up attacks as well as Varus's healing capabilities, which again feel very similar to A2's, but perhaps Varus's just nudge them out a little bit more in terms of their testing. It's curious to see that this team has taken the top spot, at least on their terms of record, as it is the highest party in there. But I do think it's quite reasonable, since Thunder teams are kind of on the downswing. There are enough Fire teams currently on JP, with Volk being such a popular bonus unit that people have invested into before you Armont. Number 2, and June came along. So if you look at the combination of why this water team is probably number 1 right now, has something to do with how still prevalent Volk will be as in terms of a bonus unit, and in terms of a unit that people have been developing. Is a 70 cost, he was quite cheap for players to get and raise for the last little bit, and making him essentially everywhere. So with a combination of just the good number of fire-based teams that are weak to water, and earth with the new version of Want pushing down on Thunder teams, it's probably why this water team has taken top spot. However, I don't expect it to take top spot forever. I still do think that some combination of water and ice is probably the overall strongest team in the entire game, featuring, of course, June and A2, and some version of a tank that can fit into the vision cards there. So anyway, just some food for thought as I've been mucking around with stuff and looking at some of the stuff that has come out. But for people who are curious, this the only things worth noting here is that June is using her sword, the reliquary armor, as well as bells. Odin, Dark Siren, and the Schnack vision card. Varus is using her sword, the survival armor, as well as a trust mastery that I actually look up which one that is. Don't recognize right in the hair order. Oh, I do actually. I know this. Ah, yes, it's Keton, which is an interesting way of getting a TMR. Probably could switch it up for something else. Anyway, game activate, Sildra, Chaos Odin, and it's a wonderful water-based vision card. I don't remember the title of it in English. Summer Glassy with Golem, partially because Golem is just good against Thunder, so it makes it a little bit better. The Leviathan card, as well as Dark Shiva with her own sword, survival gear, and a Trust Mastery from, and I do believe I know this one, Dialdo, who we all know and care so much about. But anyway, just a brief, well, somewhat brief, because we're running on 20 minutes chat, about what some of the best teams in JP look like currently. So hope this has given you a bit of an idea about what teams could be generally what you want to make. And if you would like more details, please ask, and maybe I can do a smaller video about one team in specific. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. See you later.